Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. I am very late recording these. I completely lost track of time. I was sucked into a project that's hopefully going to be released this weekend. I looked up, realized it was pitch black, and I didn't shoot the Q&As yet. It still felt like it was noon. Happens all the time. So I'm going to crack open a beer, my first in a while actually, because I'm trying to do a diet thing, but feel like now's the time to crack open a beer, sit back, and see what we got for the Q&As. So let's see what we got. First up, Alex S. said, not exactly a retro gaming question, but what's your opinion on OLED TVs? Do you fear burn-in or auto brightness limiters? Anything you particularly like or dislike about them? I'm interested in them for gaming, but also just the general viewing experience. I also love a good deal, and they're pretty pricey. I don't mind spending the money if I love the product, though. I absolutely love my OLED TV. My friend Destiny just got another one that's even better than the one I have. I think they're incredible in every way except for two. Price, of course. You can get a TV that doesn't suck for like $300. I mean, it's, have realistic expectations. You're going to have motion blur, the black levels aren't going to be as good, but if you put it in the context of a few $100 TV, you can get an LCD LED TV that's great, that you'll be happy with. Whereas if you fork over a lot more than that, almost 10 times the price, you get a pretty amazing experience. But here's the other difference. I have one of those cheap TVs that I use in my bedroom that's now 2+ years old, and I don't really care about it. And I love that I don't care about it. I just turn it on sometimes, and it's my nightlight. If I'm getting ready for bed, I'll turn on a YouTube video, and the TV will only be on for 3 minutes, and I don't even care. Whereas my OLED TV, I wouldn't just turn it on and turn it back off. I'd make sure to only turn it on when I'm using it. And same things, I've had a couple of, socially distanced Skype calls with people where we cracked a few beers and sat down and just kind of talked using that TV. And I didn't really care if there was ever burn-in from a computer being on there or anything like that, because I've, in my opinion, already got my money's worth out of it. Now, I assume that it's going to last many more years, but if it didn't, it wouldn't kill me if I had to replace it. Whereas if my very expensive OLED TV ever had burn-in or anything like that, I would get pretty upset. So that's really my only opinion on it. I love it for everything, for gaming, for movies, for TV, but it's something that I care about. So I would never get one as a computer monitor unless I could afford to have one as a secondary computer monitor just for video editing and stuff like that. Basically I would suggest getting it in every situation except for a monitor, or except when you really want something that you could beat up and you don't have to worry about, like a pickup truck versus a fancy car. So that's pretty much my only opinions, but if you don't, or if none of that applies to you, then I would absolutely pick one up, and I think most people would think it's worth the money. Mr. Pete 1985 said, not a question, they just wanted to say we needed an optical drive emulator for the PlayStation 2 because they're sick of messing with homebrew apps that work sometimes and then decide to stop because I look at the console wrong. Lucas Perzovic chimed in to mention Free McBoot. But I actually agree 100%. So it's not an optical drive emulator in the sense that you can't just throw in PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 disc images and have it treat it like it was a disc. It works completely differently. Now, one trick a friend of mine told me, I think it was actually Beast, was plug in your PlayStation 2 to the network and let it auto update a lot of these apps, and then the compatibility will go up because there's a lot of fixes and stuff like that. And I guess you could even download settings for certain auto download settings, so games that may be problematic with default settings would automatically launch with different. So it's better than I originally thought, but I agree 100%. And I do remember a couple of years ago, or maybe a year ago, talking to Alex from Terra Onion and suggesting this, and he said something like, "Oh, nobody cares about a PlayStation 2 ODE," and I kind of just laughed. I was like, "All right, Alex, wait till your mode comes out and you'll see how much the feedback is for people asking for this." So, all teasing and kidding aside, I really do hope Terra Onion ports the mode over to the PS2 because it's already the perfect platform, It's a hardware-based thing that's designed to be used with multiple different consoles. So if they're able to pull that off, I would pick up another one immediately for my PlayStation 2, especially if everything's just treated like a disc. So drop your PlayStation 2 ISO on there, drop a movie, a DVD ISO, drop a PlayStation 1 game, whatever. So I agree 100%. I hope people are listening, and I hope we see something like that. Also, just on another aside, so many PlayStation 2 drives are dying, and it's a lot of work to open that thing up, get a replacement laser, make sure it matches. I do think a lot of people would really prefer just getting an ODE in there, so I agree 100%. Adam W. has a question regarding the Genesis games that also were released on Sega CD. Usually the Sega CD version has CD audio, but sometimes it has improved graphics or things like full motion video, basically things that take advantage of the Sega CD's extra hardware. And Adam wants to know if somebody could hack the Sega CD version of the game in order to have the original cartridge audio on it. That should be completely doable on both original hardware as well as with one of the optical drive emulator cartridges. You would just have to either find rips of the Genesis music or rip it yourself and then replace the CD audio tracks. I think a decent way to do this might be to just dump the original disc and then figure out which of the audio tracks are which, and then just replace the waves with ones labeled the same one with the actual Genesis track, and then recompile it back into an ISO or get it into a format where you could just drop it on the actual cartridge. I think that might be cool if you picked games that would really benefit from the enhancements of the Sega CD, and I don't know which those are. I totally understand why you would want to do that, though. Some games, the CD audio might not be to your preference as opposed to the cartridge one, but definitely keep me posted, because if you figure out a game that really benefits from the Sega CD hardware but you don't like the music or just want different music, I'd certainly be interested to try that out. Sean Richmond said, Macho Nacho, the person who worked with My Life in Gaming on the LCD episode, featured the RetroKai Game Gear LCD screen that he said has comparable quality to the McWill, but is easier to install. Do you know if this is a clone of the McWill? At first glance, I would say yes, but it might not be like a stolen clone. I asked around about it, and somebody used the phrase it might be a clean room reverse engineer, which is legal, where basically you test one thing and you're making yours, and you don't steal any of the code, you don't steal the hardware design, but you're basically just trying to make your own to work just like it. That's legal. It's annoying, but it could be one of those. It could be just a clone, but it does have the same exact features, which, that's a little weird. So I honestly don't know, and I would like to know the answer to that, because I don't like to support cloning. There's like 99.999% of the time I actually hate all cloning of any kinds, and there's only an occasional very rare scenario where I would actually support that. Especially like if a known clone company had their product cloned, I would buy that just out of principle, even if I didn't need it. But to continue the question, your friend's recapping his Game Gear and doesn't know. Oh, you also don't want to support cloned ripoffs, and you're not sure which one to get. So it's a good question. I really don't know. There's other people talking about releasing Game Gear screens, like I mentioned last week, but there's no official release date or anything like that. Another question also about a component in their setup. They're using a GE passive mechanical switch for S-Video into the RetroTink 2X Pro that has composite with the S-Video inputs. Right. So the switch will not show my NES composite on any of my inputs if the other S-Video inputs are populated. I solved this issue with a dongle that transcodes a composite signal to an S-Video signal without external power. It has some sort of chroma separation circuitry that looks basically identical to direct composite after testing against directly, but you were wondering if you heard about it or know about it from a lag perspective. I haven't noticed the lag in gameplay, but I don't have a time sleuth to check for sure. Do you think this is an okay solution, or do you know of a better S-Video switch that can also pass composite? I'm trying to keep my consoles as stock as possible. I mean, there's a bunch of other stuff you could do. You could get older Extron equipment. Audio Authority, I believe, was a good brand. But I don't think something like that would add lag. If the quality's good enough and you're really just getting composite to S-video, you should be fine. It might even just be splitting the composite signal to both Luma and Chroma, hoping that the target device can differentiate between the two. But as long as it already works in your setup, and it's not causing any interference that's annoying you, I would just leave well enough alone. It should be the same quality as just composite, and that type of thing shouldn't add lag. But, if you ever go to upgrade or if you ever have some extra cash, I would then look into what used to be a really expensive and high-end analog switch, and now you could find for really cheap on eBay, when they're available. Sometimes it takes a while for them to pop up, but good question. Monty sourced a backward-compatible PS3 to cover PlayStation 3, 2, and 1, and they found that at least with PS3 games, that the picture is wider than their CRT. It's a JVC multi-format 460p, and out of the PlayStation 3, there's a noticeable image overscan both left and right. Is this normal? I can't find anything definitive online. Also, is there any geometry checking software for PS3 to verify the image? I want to make sure my screen geometry isn't the issue. So, sounds just like overscan on your monitor. You should try to find an overscan, underscan button, and if one doesn't exist, you should probably try to find the service manual and get in. And as long as you just do basic geometry stuff, just write down the numbers. So H size, V size, and H and V position. That's one of the few things about CRTs that I would say go ahead and do whatever you want with, because even if you completely mess it up, just get it back to sort of centered, and then you're good good to go. And then just don't touch the other settings. As far as checking software for the PS3, I would get a DVD or Blu-ray that has some kind of calibration software and patterns, and just use that. The Blu-ray, I don't actually know which one would be better. My gut says grab a Blu-ray, set your PS3 to 480p and go from there. But maybe check into it. Maybe look into see if there's discs that specifically have patterns for each resolution. And if not, then just use a DVD and it should be at least good enough. But yeah, that should be a fairly easy one. And if it's a JVC multi-format, it's probably got some kind of controls that allow you to do that buried somewhere. Daniel Lodato had a question about their GameCube. I think I would need a little more info to answer this question exactly the way you wanted, but I'm going to give a general answer, and if it's what you need, cool, and if you need me to elaborate, please let me know. But basically, one of Daniel's GameCubes had a disk drive that just died, and it seems to be one with only analog output. So since they're cracking it open to probably either replace the drive or add a GC loader, they'll want to know what other mods I would recommend for it. So that's kind of a tricky answer, because if this is not a sentimental thing for you and you have a GameCube with only an analog output and a dead disk drive, that might be something that would be better used for parts. Is the case good? Do you know somebody that has a GameCube, with a broken case? Is there somebody else that might be able to use the motherboard? Basically stuff like that. And it might be cheaper overall to just pick up another GameCube console only, and then use that, one with a digital output to use with the plug and play HDMI dongles. So while I agree that I would never throw out an old GameCube like that, you might actually get more use out of it by parting it out if you know people that need the parts. But let's answer the question as if you really wanted to keep this one and you wanted to fix it up. I would obviously do a GC loader to it now, or get another disk drive, because maybe you want one with the ODE in it, maybe you want one for original discs. Either way would be fine. But if you wanted to keep it, I would try to look into one of those solutions that allows you to install a GC video kit into one of those older models. It's a little bit more complicated, and there's a few different ways you could do it. You could have the dual where you cut a hole for HDMI and also have RGB and component video if you wanted through the analog output. There's one that would do it analog only, so you would add RGB or component to that output as well. But I would look into that. I believe I talked about it a few times on the website, so just search RetroRGB for that, and that would be something I would recommend if you wanted to just go all out and mod this one. And you would end up with a pretty unique thing. I'd also replace the fan just because fans die and these consoles are getting older. So unless your fan is miraculously in perfect condition, seems like a pretty cheap upgrade. Laser Bear has theirs. I don't know if the fans are in stock, but retrofrog.net, Todd, also had an interesting solution that I just bought and I haven't had a chance to test yet. So yeah, that's basically what I would do. Is if you wanted to keep that one, try to find a solution where you could install GC Video, a dual HDMI and analog, RGB plus component or just RGB output in that. Do a GC loader or a new disk drive and add a new fan and kind of go from there. Jonathan Levine said they're curious about comb filters for consoles that only output composite natively. The front-loader NES, for example, is infamous for its mediocre composite signal. Depends on the motherboard revision, but continuing. Now I'm aware that you could mod it with the NES RGB and get far superior quality with RGB or encoded S-Video. However, I'm thinking of someone who'd want to keep their NES intact with stock composite, but who'd still like to get the best possible signal out of it. I know you've previously mentioned hooking consoles through a VHS or DVD player that have comb filter functionalities, but I'd like to hear more about this. What's your personal experience with it? What type of comb filter would yield the best results for 240p? So that's a very interesting question. If this is something that's important to you, I would try to track down an NES that has the better revision motherboard. I think, I'm doing this off the top of my head, so please double check me. There's a good chance I'm wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure original Famicoms are way worse for this, whereas like the worst model Famicom you can get outputs a far worse and dirtier signal than the worst model front-loading NES. But I would just do a little research to figure out what's just generally known as the better model revision. There's also projects out there from people that are trying to improve all of even the bad revision consoles. I did some testing on my Famicom last week and they all failed. So, you win some, you lose some, I guess. But I would start there. Then I would kind of ask where you're going with this. If you're going into a flat panel TV, RetroTinks should be great. Check with the new firmware update that was just released, and then definitely toggle between auto and retro for the filter switch. The Mini would probably be the cheapest way if you wanted to go to a flat panel. Another interesting thing you might try if you're going into a CRT. Most CRTs have comb filters in them, but you could try to get the Tink2XM, set it to pass-through mode, and then do an HDMI to component converter. So you're basically going from analog to digital to analog, and I don't know if that would even work with a light gun, but at the very least, you would be able to see if that comb filter did anything. You mentioned dedicated devices that do it. So, I would look into all of that stuff, but to be honest, I think that there's no comb filter in the world that would fix really bad video output. And I would think that if you're using a basic CRT, especially something from the early 2000s, at that point, even the base model TVs had awesome comb filters in them because, they just as things got more and more simplified, they're able to do the processing on a single chip. And, a lot of companies, if not all of them, used decent filters in there. So if this is important to you, I would hunt down either the motherboard revision or a fix for whatever yours is that cleans up the composite output and then just connect it to a CRT with a decent comb filter, and you should have a really great experience. And I know I say this all the time, but I do want to just repeat myself and say, a lot of people have misunderstood when I said anything negative about composite video. Composite video going into a CRT is an awesome experience for any pre-HD console. So not the GameCube, not the original Xbox, but not the Wii, but pretty much anything before that. Even some PS2 games, composite looks great on a CRT. It just looks terrible plugged directly into a flat panel when you're relying on the flat panel to process it right, to scale it right, to not add any lag or anything like that. So I think that it's what you're chasing is as long as you set realistic expectations, you could end up with a really awesome solution, just not plugged directly into a flat panel. So Normal Guy wants to know if there's any work being done on converting a Philips CDI 450 power supply from PAL to NTSC. or any more work on a USB power supply, as the European CDI 450 seems to be a little more common and cheaper. Also, any work on an ODE for the CDI. No to all of that. And an ODE would be awesome. I would certainly appreciate that. But as far as the power supply goes, that uses like a weird network jack style connector for power. So I think a better solution would be just an aftermarket power supply, just a custom thing that uses like a triad wall brick that plugs into this, that breaks out the different power circuits. I think it's 5 and 12 volts on there or something. Heck, maybe even an arcade PSU. That might even actually be a decent solution if it needs all those different voltages. Get one of those Meanwell arcade PSUs and then just have a custom adapter built to wire it in. So if anybody wants to work on one of those, I think that would, the more I think about it, the more I think that arcade PSU would be the right solution, because those would be compatible, or should be internationally compatible, and you should be able to just do a wiring on the proper wiring on the output. But I don't remember off the top of my head what power signals the CDI needs. I think it's 5 and 12 volt, but it could be a whole bunch of different weird things. Who knows? So as long as it requires signals from an existing power supply, I would definitely like to see that happen, because there's a lot of top-loading CDIs out there, console only, that don't come with a power supply. I have a spare one myself that I would certainly love to see, an easy way for me to just send that over to a friend. So good question. Got nothing for you though, unfortunately. Retro Tinkerer said they're looking to purchase a Dotronics wall monitor and has a few questions. First, do you have any experience with RGB wall monitors? I don't know what you mean by that. If you just mean like the monitor that I talked about in the interview with Kurt, then I don't have too much experience, but they're essentially like a direct wired consumer grade CRT or arcade monitor, and just a little bit higher quality. So you probably aren't going to get the line count and the sharpness of a PVM or BVM, but it's probably going to be better than your average arcade monitor or consumer grade TV. Second question, I was looking through the manual for the monitor and it says composite negative sync. Will I need some sort of polarity inverter to connect RGB from consoles? I want to make sure I know what I'm getting into before I purchase this display and have very little knowledge on sync polarity. If you're talking about the ones that I mentioned in the video, it should be totally fine for a standard RGBS signal. You just got to make sure the voltages are correct, and it should be able to use composite negative sync without a problem. If not, you can get an Extron RGB interface, which I think it converts the sync to whatever you need, but that should be a basic question for Kurt. He should be able to answer that just to double check. But as far as I know, that shouldn't be an issue. You should be able to just connect, like for example, a properly built RGB SCART cable. You should be able to just connect that to a pin adapter to whatever that monitor could accept, and that's it. But double check all of that to be sure. Overall, my opinion on those are they're incredibly expensive, but you're getting a brand new, essentially handmade CRT. So if you had the extra cash to throw around and something like this was important to you, it would be an awesome thing to purchase. I know if I had the cash, I would absolutely buy one and just hold on to it and use it occasionally just for fun. So good luck, and let me know what you think if you get it. David Sobel was wondering if I had any pointers on using composite SCART cable with the VCR. As in, is it more of an anything goes kind of thing, or do you have any specific cable you suggest from a shielding perspective? Well, if you're talking about integrating a VCR into an existing SCART setup and using it with composite video, you could try just finding a shielded SCART cable, but if all you're using is composite video, hold on, I got my adapter, you could just try to find one of these SCART adapters and then just use a single shielded composite video cable, plug it into this, and then kind of go through there to route everything. You just have to understand that whatever your target device is has to be able to accept composite video over SCART. So the OSSC would not, the RetroTink 2X SCART would not, If you're going into an RGB monitor, you would have to then break that out and move it over to composite video. However, some PAL TVs should be able to accept both over the same input. And in that case, I think there's like a voltage thing you might have to deal with in order to switch between it, or you might have to go into your TV settings and select it. I have zero experience with PAL CRTs that have this functionality though, so I don't think my answer for you is going to be very good. But I guess just start there and decide on what you're going to use with your target device. Bo Lee wants to know if I know of any 60 Hertz mods for the PAL Atari Jaguar. No, I'm sorry, I don't have any experience whatsoever with PAL Jaguars, but I would definitely check the Atari Age forums. I think there and maybe one other place might be the only resource that you could find that would be able to answer something like that. So start there and hopefully you'd be able to find your answer. Jordan Chaston wants to know if either of the recently posted GBS kits work with the 8220 or only for the 8200. So I think they both would. However, there's a mod for the 8220 that you would have to do separately if you wanted the best quality out of it. I have a prototype GBSC all-in-one, which I actually gutted and installed my 8220 into for this exact reason, so it could support dual simultaneous output. And the quality is meh. But it's not because of the kit, it's because the 8220 I got is lower quality. So I would look into that and I would check out the mods that you could do to the 8220s that supposedly improve video quality and kind of just go from there. Also, any opinions on decent KVM switches for retro PC collectors? They don't have a space or wallet to buy multiple model CRT monitors for every PC, and moving cables around sucks. So, no, but that's a great question because I've used so many KVMs over the years in like a server rack environment, and many of them added interference, which if you're walking up to a server to log in, change some usernames and, make a setting, who cares if there's a little interference on the screen? But in your scenario, yeah, I mean, it would make a very big difference. So that's an excellent question. I'm assuming the answer to that would be try to find some older high-end equipment that used to be really expensive and now it's cheaper. But if there's any retro PC collectors out there, maybe Vanessa could chime in. There's a few other people I know that have a good deal of experience with retro computers, so maybe they would have any suggestions for that. DW623 had a question about replacing batteries in their game cartridges. I started to answer and went off on a tangent about something completely irrelevant, so I'm going to start fresh and try to focus on your actual answer. So basically, they have a friend that's trying to do a quick and dirty solution of replacing the batteries, and they say by taping it in. Don't really know what that means, but and they're having trouble convincing this person not to do that. Other than it being plain sloppy, what are some other reasons not to replace your cartridge batteries by taping them in instead of soldering them in? So if you're talking about like snipping the old battery out and then you still have like the little metal piece and then you just tape it in place, the number one thing that will happen, not maybe, not it's good practice, what will happen is eventually the stickiness on that tape will dry out and that battery will just fall into the cartridge. And if it touches 2 points together, it'll short them together. And while this is not so likely, it's totally plausible that you would be playing your game one day, the battery falls out of the cartridge and shorts 2 pins together and shorts out your cartridge and your console. So if that's what they're doing, if they're actually just like snipping out the other battery and taping one in place so you don't have to solder, that's a terrible idea. And it absolutely will break at some point. And when it breaks, like if you're lucky, you'll be able to take the cartridge off your shelf, you'll hear something rattle, and you'll go, okay, I won't plug it in, the battery fell off. But most people aren't that lucky. Something bad is going to happen. So yeah, that is a terrible idea. No offense. And, that's the best explanation as to why not to, if I'm getting the tape thing right. But what I started to rant about in the answer that I deleted and what is still relevant is it is hard for beginners to understand why some of these things are bad practice. And one of the best examples is glue. So you hear a lot of modders just completely trash a lot of these, weird mods that are covered in glue and ugly and goopy. And the truth is, if used properly, glue is totally fine to use and in some cases recommended. It's only when it's used to cover up terrible mod work or when somebody doesn't know what they're doing that it's bad. So for example, if you mod something and your connections aren't secure, so you say, well, I'm just going to cover it in hot glue to keep those connections secure, like I used to do 8 years ago when I was first learning. That's a terrible idea for a million reasons. The mod's not going to work right. It's going to break eventually. And it's just a sign of somebody like me who just didn't know what they were doing. But let's say you have a mod that's perfectly good. You could tug on all the wires, everything's solid, it's beautifully done, but you need to ship this console across the world, across the country, something else. So you have some of the wires flopping around inside, so you use a tiny little bit of glue as strain relief, knowing that eventually that glue is going to dry up, it's going to pop off, and worst case scenario, the glue itself pops off and you have some glue, non-conductive glue flopping around in your console. Not a big deal. Totally fine. And it served the purpose. It would have served the purpose of it made it from New York to LA in the mail when it was getting thrown down the stairs by the UPS driver. So in situations like that, so let's just say hypothetically, your friend is desoldering the old batteries, soldering in a socket if it's a big enough cartridge, or if it's something like a GBA, soldering in their own battery, and it's totally secure, but then they said, but you know what, I'm going to add some tape just in case. It's still the answer of if they did it right, they wouldn't need it at all, but maybe there's something else involved in that. Maybe they did it right, but they just want to add a layer of protection. You wouldn't need it, but in a scenario like that, I certainly wouldn't look down upon it and say, oh my God, who put tape on their battery? Like I would kind of go, all right, well, it's not necessary, but it doesn't hurt anything. So, I guess that's, two answers to your question with probably way more explanation than you were looking for. But if they're legit just cutting old ones out and taping batteries in, they're going to kill people's cartridges and consoles. At some point it's going to happen. Whereas if they're modding them properly, but adding in some kind of isolation, let them know they probably don't need to do that. But who knows? It might not be as bad as you think. Alex S. had another question. When recapping a console like the original Xbox, is it recommended to replace the surface mount caps? Do those even go bad like the through-hole ones? Well, depends what you mean. So if you just mean they're still the cans, it's the best way to describe them. They're still the aluminum cans, but they're surface mounted. Yeah, it's exactly the same. But if you mean the tiny little rectangular SMD caps, they're both technically surface mount, not through-hole. But if you mean the tiny little rectangular ones, that's different. And the reason for that is the ones that are the aluminum cans have fluid inside them. And those will always at some point dry out and possibly leak. And consoles like the original Xbox, the Game Gear, the Duos, all of those have fluid that will leak out and corrode the motherboard. And at some point, it just won't be fixable anymore. It'll just turn to an acid-ruined motherboard. However, the SMD ones, the tiny little rectangular ones, I think they do go bad at some point, but when they go bad, as far as I know, at least as far as I've seen, they don't leak out all over the place. So if you're doing a recap for preventative maintenance, I would ignore those. I would only replace the aluminum ones. But if you're troubleshooting a problem, then you might actually want to go and check out the other ones and see if there's something that needs replacing. But in my limited experience, I haven't run into something where that was an issue yet. I mean, I'm sure it'll happen at some point. So the short answer to your question is the ones that look like little aluminum cans are the ones that you need to worry about, because if you don't replace the ones that are known to leak out, they might leak out and ruin your console. Andrew Neasley is looking to play their Wii in native 480p on a CRT PC monitor and are looking for an inexpensive converter for it. Well, the easiest way to do, or the easiest thing to get, is one of these Linux Bot 3000 converters. Now, this one right here, I believe, is RGB to component, or the opposite, but I'm pretty sure they make one. They have an eBay store. They also sell those really cool RGB input cards for JVC monitors. So I would try that, definitely. That'll be obviously a dedicated standalone device. And while I haven't tested them, I've tested other products they make, and they're great. So the other alternative would be to use a GBS control setup, but I would only recommend that if you needed it for other stuff. So let's just say you wanted to get one for downscaling or motion adaptive deinterlacing or one of the other weird features. Then I would say, well, at that point, then just use that to convert component video to VGA and you're done. But I don't know if I would go through the trouble of getting one of those just for this purpose. So decide, do you need like a Swiss Army knife of hardware for your retro gaming, or do you just want a single solution and be done? And of course, there's other converters that you could probably find on eBay that I'm sure would do a good job with 480p. It's not, it's a standard resolution, so it's not like the weird 240p retro gaming stuff. And I would just look on eBay for used Key Digital, Kramer, there's a couple other companies that do it. But, I do always like to see the retro gaming community supported. So as long as they have them in stock, check out LinuxBot 3000 store on eBay, and that should be your straightforward answer. Jason Guffey says, when it comes to CRTs, what are the pros and cons of computer monitors versus TVs? Seems like I mostly only hear hype over PVMs and BVMs, but not a ton of talk about computer monitors. Are they inferior to PVM or BVMs since most monitors are consumer grade? Are there equivalents of computer monitors on PVM, BVMs? It's a good question, but generally speaking, the only problem with VGA, PC, CRT monitors, whatever you want to call them, is that they don't accept 15 kilohertz, which means they won't accept 240p or 480i. So that's why that video that I put out a while back, if you want to just check on YouTube for that, but classic consoles on VGA monitors, you get an incredible look to it. And if you turn scan lines on, especially if you go through something like the open source scan converter and get everything tweaked, you put scan lines on and you turn up the brightness on your PC monitor, it'll look really close to a PVM or a BVM. So they're absolutely great. It's like anything else in the world, though. If you find one with 1 million hours on it, it's probably going to look like crap. If you find a newer one, even a base model, it's probably going to look great. So, they're awesome choices. And especially if, like I just talked about with Andrew's question, especially if your source is 480p native, it'll look phenomenal. And one of the most impressed I ever was at a monitor was my friend Jose has a certain model VGA monitor that just looks insane with the Dreamcast. I mean, it would, in 480p native, it rivals all of the other professional monitors I've seen. It was nuts. So yeah, they're awesome. Definitely feel free to grab one if you could pick one up. Worst case scenario, pick up like a RetroTink or something to go with it so you could scale your consoles into it. And definitely check out that video I did because it should answer all your other questions on it. Last question from Alex. They want to know if the controller lag test results posted by Mr. Add-ons is applicable in a general sense or just to the Mr. That's an excellent question, and I kind of get two answers with this. So when it comes to like the wireless stuff, there's obviously more involved. There's your environment. If you're in Manhattan with 1 million wireless networks around, it's going to be laggier than if you're in a barn in the middle of nowhere with no other wireless networks in there. But generally speaking, when you're testing the wireless stuff, it's really accurate to real world performance. When it comes to the USB stuff, you're also testing whatever device that you're plugging it into. So the Mister is an incredibly fast device, and it should be testing just the latency of the controller itself. And that is absolutely applicable to that controller, and those lag test results are really just using the Mister as the tool to test it. However, if something is 1 millisecond, if a USB controller only adds 1 millisecond of lag, that doesn't necessarily mean that every device you plug it into won't also add its own latency on top of it. So, if there's a USB controller that sheet says 1 millisecond latency, and you plug it into your PC, the way your PC processes USB might add something, the way a different other device might. So just keep that in mind. But generally speaking, the lag tests that you see are testing the controllers themselves, just using the Mister as the tool to do it. And you just have to kind of put everything else into perspective. But honestly, I think that's an awesome resource, and it's something that I have a kit right here. I just haven't even opened the box yet. I really want to get around to testing that. Lewis F96 said they really enjoy the Mister and have no plans on buying any more original consoles. However, they do want to expand their collection of original games. Now, I know I won't always have the luxury of having complete cartridges, and I don't mind buying loose games, so I want to know of any good third-party cases for consoles like the NES, SNES, and Genesis. Do you have any idea? First of all, I actually know of a lot of people in the same boat. They have unmodded consoles that they were planning on modding, and some they decide to. Sometimes they want to leave them stock or whatever, but basically they're using their Mister to game on, but it's still really important that they collect these things. I actually think a lot of the whole experience is important to people. You know, going to your local game store and you know, buying something that you see on the shelf that you didn't realize you wanted till you saw it. Like that's still an important thing. And I also personally like to have the original consoles no matter what, even if you just plug them composite into a consumer CRT, just to always have that experience there. But to actually answer your question, so the main manufacturer of the third-party cases people were using stopped making them, but another company stepped up to make them, and they're a lot more expensive, but they're still really good quality, and I think there's other solutions out there as well. So I guess search RetroRGB for the posts I did on that, but I think this is really something that the collectors that listen to this podcast would be better off answering, because maybe there's new updates, maybe there's a better store to get it from. I know Video Games New York had it, but obviously if you're not in New York, that might be hard. Or I guess check their eBay store, maybe they might have them. But there were definitely other companies stepping up when that main manufacturer decided to not make them anymore. And I do think it's a really cool thing to have, because not only does it prevent them from collecting dust, but it does look really cool to print out the original artwork, add your own insert, have that on your shelf with the rest of them. I know a lot of people that are really proud of their collections and really like seeing it there. So while I don't know off the top of my head one specific resource, I know that there was a problem. More people are starting to make them now, and you should be available to pick them up at some point. Well, that's it for this week. The beer I was drinking is just about halfway done. So, I was not drinking for a while just for weight loss reasons, but I guess it reset my tolerance a bit as well, which I guess is always a good thing. So any drinkers out there, it's always good to reset yourself once a year or so, just, for calories, for tolerance reasons, whatever else. But anyway, I thought anybody who'd followed and knows how much I like beer might have gotten a kick out of that. The entire time I barely even got through half of one. But anyway, if you're new to these Q&As, I don't usually randomly talk about beer, although I like to. And if you have any new questions that you want to ask or anything like that, please just put them wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A post. While I answer an unhealthy amount of questions across all social media and YouTube, these questions are focused on basically saying thank you to everybody that supports for any of the monthly support services. So please answer or ask your question there. And if I missed your question, it's usually because I accidentally deleted it in post or something. So either re-ask in next week's or just message me directly if it's important. But either way, thank you to everybody that participates in these. I always have a great time doing them. And of course, and especially thank you for your support, because it's what's keeping all of the work I do going. So I'm going to go back and try to finish editing that video that will hopefully be out tomorrow or the next day. And I hope you all enjoy that one too. So thanks, and I'll see you next time.